If you have been obsessing over your download numbers and wondering if anyone is actually listening to your podcast or your social, this episode is for you. I've recorded over 700 episodes of this podcast now, and there are still days it feels like I'm shouting into an echo chamber until someone tells me that one conversation changed everything for them. Traci DeForge has lived her entire life in audio, from sleeping with a radio under her pillow to building podcast systems that keep hosts from burning out and pod fading, as she called it. And the uncomfortable truth that she and I both unpacked in today's episode is that your podcast isn't failing because you're not good enough. It's failing because you've built it on vanity metrics instead of impact, sustainability, and discovery. And in this conversation, we go straight into the weeds and we break down how to build a show around your strengths, around your audience, and a real growth strategy. So whether you have a podcast or you're launching one or thinking about it, this episode's for you. So let's get into the show. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mind of George Show. I have a very special guest today. I'm going to do her intro in a minute, but let me just say I love her energy. She's radiant. She's exuberant. She is passionate and self-labeled, potentially a masochist for how she loves doing business and how much she cares about doing business the right way. But I'm really excited to be joined by today's guest, Traci DeForge. So Traci, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks, George. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited. I feel like I'm going to be taking more notes than I am adding anything because you've been in this game for a long time. And this is why I want to ask this question to start. Like you started it, and maybe I'll just name you this, the queen of radio, right? Like on radio, being in radio for so long, and then transitioned, understood the power of it, and moved into podcast in a time in our world where it was really needed. And you still utilize this all day and believe in it. And so I'm curious from your perspective, knowing like what you like to talk about, but if somebody listening to this was to really like take to heart things we're going to talk about today, right? Whether they have a brand, whether they have a coaching business, a physical products brand, what do you think they could expect to shift or change or to see results in their life or business if they actually applied what you're going to share?
I think that the one thing I would love if they stop listening after I said this sentence, which I hope that won't be the case, but this would be the one thing I would love to just have people really understand is that you can literally change a conversation and impact someone's life with one voice. You can have one message, one voice, and it can impact one person's life. And so it's really, really important to have the right mindset of your metrics and not get caught up in vanity metrics, because it is the quality over the quantity. Because if you're about making impact, which I am and you are, you can do that with one conversation with one person. And I am literally living proof of that, because listening to a podcast that was not my clients, had nothing to do with my business. I had been a migraine sufferer for literally my whole life. And we had relocated to Taos, New Mexico for a period of time, and my migraines escalated. And I could not figure out why. And I didn't know if it was the elevation or the change in this or that. So my migraine was so bad that the only thing I could literally do was listen to a podcast. So I listened to a podcast about migraines, and because of the nature of what I do, I love to also share that it was a branded podcast. It was a podcast that was done by a migraine expert to create a community around migraine sufferers. And they shared one thing in that episode that I listened to that had to do with a very, very strange food allergy. And I had eliminated a lot of other things. People had told me a lot of other things, but listening to that one podcast, that one episode, I took away that tip. And that is what it had caused me migraines my entire life. And just if you are a migraine listener, I feel like I should share that with you in case this one changes your life. And it's annatto, which is an all natural vegetable dye that makes cheese orange. And if I ingest annatto, I am down for the count for like 3 days. And I learned that from a podcast. So, wow. And it has nothing to do with produce your podcast. It just has to do with literally me as a consumer or as a podcast user listening to a podcast for information.
I love the way that you framed that and you answered that question because it's so powerful. And I think no matter what your desire is when you start something, it's really easy to get caught up in the rat race, right? And I know for me personally, I've had moments of that where, I don't know, you know this, running a podcast, right? Sometimes it feels like the biggest echo chamber in the world. Where I'm like,
Right.
is anybody listening? Right? Like I'm over here locked in the studio recording, 700 episodes. And then, it's those moments where like I had a barista at the coffee shop and I make friends with everybody. And she's like, hey, I just want to be honest. Like I listened to your podcast where you talked about this and it really, really helped me. And I'm like so grateful that you order coffee here. And it's those moments where we get to be anchored in. And I love the way that you shared that. And so for everybody listening, I got to give you some context on who this incredible woman is before we like kind of dive in, because I want to hear all of it. I want to know how you go from radio to podcast to, I forgot what you said, like living out of a suitcase. You are mobile everywhere and just like
Yeah.
living your best life on your terms. But, for everybody wondering, Traci, she founded an incredible company called Produce Your Podcast. And it is truly, besides award winning, it is white glove, full service production and audience growth marketing agency. Like she literally told me, she's like, no. If you want to run a podcast with us, we just tell you when to show up. We have a producer in the room. We do your guests for you. We help you with everything. And so when I mean that she like soup to nuts, white glove service is it. And she also, if I'm correct, you created the Podcast Management Academy, right? So it's the industry's only certified podcast manager training program. You built PodHive. You co-founded the Podcast Professionals Association. You host the Growth Accelerator podcast, which is your show. Co-hosted, or maybe still do, the Ask Bryant radio show in LA. You've been featured everywhere: CNN, CTV, American Express Open, Radio Inc., and is a member of the Rolling Stone Culture Council. And when do you sleep? And how do you get all that done?
Well, I really do think it's always kind of funny to hear it read back to me. I'm like, oh wow, yeah, that's a lot. But it's all an extension of really wanting people to be able to enter podcasting at any point that works for them. That is, you don't always have to have a show to benefit from podcasting. Maybe you just want to show up on a podcast and be a guest on a podcast, or maybe you want to work behind the scenes because you don't want to be that person behind the mic, or you want to make a living being a podcast service professional. The industry's so new. We didn't have our own trade association for podcast service professionals. Trust me, I sat on that one for like 5 years hoping someone else was going to do it, and they didn't. So I found myself a co-founder and we launched it a couple years ago. But I think for me, I had an amazing opportunity to enter the space in a really early time. And there was so much opportunity. And you've talked a lot about this on some of your other episodes. I mean, entrepreneurs do suffer from the shiny object syndrome. It's just that I niched mine down and I found a lot of shiny objects within the podcasting space.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. And I love that podcasting for me is the antidote to shiny object syndrome, because when you commit, you got to commit.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You're like,
there's no doubt about it.
Right? Like I look at podcasting as it's very much, it has potential short-term wins, but it really is a long-term play where the short terms are more so like added benefits to staying consistent with it. And so for me, I feel like launching a podcast was probably one of the best business decisions I've ever made when it comes to like consistency and focus and staying plugged into my audience. And so it helped eradicate my shiny object syndrome for sure.
Right. But what you just shared is the core of why I built Produce Your Podcast the way that I built it. We were joking about me being a masochist about it, but what I really did was create an infrastructure and systems to support the hosts so that they didn't have to suffer of pod fade. Because if all you have to do is show up and do what we're having now, which is have a great conversation with someone you enjoy that's like-minded and you can share your expertise, and that's the only piece you have to worry about, you're going to be probably 10 times more likely to keep going. Yeah. And I know this about myself, and that's why I created this system, because I wanted it to be such that people, it wasn't something that became annoying or that they got fatigued by, or that crossing the T's and dotting the I's drug them down, because it's the energy that you bring to the mic that really gets people involved and feels connected to you. But if you've got all those other things happening, you're just going to stop because it stops being fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I used to read because I've coached a lot of people on launching podcasts and helped them do it. And I used to read the crazy statistics about like how many shows don't make it past like 50 episodes.
I know.
And
And that was my mission to change that data.
yeah,
It
yeah,
currently still is, by the way. It's not in the past tense.
yeah. And I'm curious too, like how did this transition happen? So you like grew up on radio, like the, voice of the radio, doing all of this, like, what did it look like, or what was the desire, or what was the moment when you were like, okay, radio, got it, I've been doing this, but I want to go all the way into podcasting? Like, what was that story like?
Yeah, so the first thing your audience probably needs to know about me is like, this is like a no joke passion love affair, like lifelong. So
Yeah.
I used to sleep with a radio under my pillow when I was like a little teeny tiny human. And I would listen to ghost stories on AM transistor radio. So audio storytelling was like really kind of got me hooked. Then as a teen, teen angst, I grew up at the time where I was, making the call-ins to the radio station, making the playlists on the cassette tapes. My dad was the president of the March of Dimes at the time. We had the live remotes. I was obsessed with like the air talents, DJs then, being at these live events. And so it was just something that I always really, really just loved from, infancy on, right? So when I had the opportunity, I went to work in broadcast radio like straight out of college, and I was recruited by the radio station to work in their sales department. And so you can probably no shock there, but I was just like, I literally remember the day I walked into the radio station for the first time, and I couldn't believe like I get to do this, right? It just was like I was literally like, I can't believe I get to do this. And, fast forward seriously 30 plus years, I still show up to my business every day thinking I get to do this. And so I am incredibly blessed. I do not take that for granted. I absolutely realize what a true just blessing that is to get to do what you love and love what you do. But there was a lot in between that, right? So the radio itself, I had also had the amazing opportunity to work in the industry when the FCC had deregulated the number of stations that you could own at one time. And at that was in 1997, and it became a free for all. And the smaller independent broadcasting stations were getting bought up by the larger conglomerates. Clear Channel then became iHeart. But I had the absolute most fortunate opportunity to be working for brokers, the people that own the stations that I worked for. And I worked for the same company for over 20 years. And radio, that is like that's an insane statistic. So I had the amazing opportunity to work with the same company 20 plus years, and they were on the acquisition side. So I was like 30 years old. I'd gone sales manager, general manager. They made me the general manager of one station. Then all hell broke loose, and we went 1, 3, 6, 12 in like a matter of like 3 years. And it was the most fantastical life altering professional experience. Like an MBA could never have done for me what that experience did for me, because I learned how to integrate different sales teams. I didn't even learn how, like I built the systems to integrate competitive sales teams, bring them all in, wrote the playbook for in our market for how to not, cannibalize these dollars, because all of a sudden, you were selling against this team and now they're part of your team. It was completely different on the air talent side, integrating all of these people that had vehemently competed against each other, and now they were all under the same ownership. I mean, the story could go on and on about this amazing opportunity that I had. So what it did for me is just being in broadcast radio alone, I learned so much about strategic partnerships. I learned so much about audio storytelling, how to do theater of the mind to get people and use radio commercials to get people into your business, why and how that worked. So it was just like this level of just building all of these experiences. And at a point, I was managing 12 stations in the Atlanta metro. There wasn't another layer for me to go to other than own it. And that wasn't an option for me at the time. So that's when I left to start my own business. And then initially, as an entrepreneur, I started doing management transition for other stations that were going through similar situations. And then I started doing business development strategy for entrepreneurs and for Fortune 500s. So that kind of like, long story short, gets us to where the podcasting piece came in, because I had never really left radio, but it had just always been integrated as a part of my business development strategy and working with some of the entrepreneurs in Fortune 500s. But my last Fortune 500 engagement before I started Produce Your Podcast was with Weight Watchers International. And they were revamping their in-person meeting model. And it was, again, I have had so many amazing experiences in working with these brands. And we were at piloting an event, and this is kind of the human side of the story. There was a beautiful 20 brown curly haired girl at this dinner on the Weight Watchers team. And she said, Traci, how is it that you get to do what it is that you do? And that question just pierced me in a way. Like, normally I would just be like, well, I worked 30 years, at this point, X amount of years in broadcast, and I did this, kind of the story I just told you. But the way I answered her question was just really different. It was like, I just answered it like very personally about the intersection between personal and business growth, and that I had made a conscious decision to leave this high pressured corporate job that I had to really start my own journey. And I'll never forget that conversation as long as I live, because when I went back to the hotel that night and we were in Minneapolis, we had piloted this event that later Oprah ended up activating when she came in. So it was super successful. But what really reminds me of that takeaway was that I decided that I wanted to write a book, and I wanted to write a book called Journey to There, exploring the intersection between personal and business growth. And I was like, yeah, that ain't never going to happen. Like, I've had thought of a lot of book concepts, but never written one, because I love to talk, not to type. Yep. And so I texted in the airport on the way back. I texted a dear friend of mine that I had worked with for years in the radio business. And I said, do you produce podcasts? And he texted back and he said, for you, I would. And I was like off to the races. And then I looked around, and there were no full service podcast agencies that were serving businesses that were like my size, like a consultant, a strategist, a solopreneur, a small business owner. There were lots of people having a lot of fun in podcasting, doing the Charles Schwabs and the Trader Joe's and all the big brands, but nobody like serving me. So we built it. And it was an amazing, we honed technology that pre-existed Riverside and Squadcast and Descript. We started Produce Your Podcast by recording people virtually with live engineers in the studio. And finally getting to the end of your initial question was, I built it because I knew if I wanted this podcast to be sustainable, I was going to have a team of people helping me and supporting me getting it out, because I'm a customer first kind of girl. And I know myself, I'm still this way. I'm going to focus on my clients first and what I'm doing for myself. I do not practice the oxygen mask theory unless I'm actually on the plane, because that's just the way it is for me. And so I needed accountability, structure, and systems to get me to keep doing that podcast. And Journey to There was my very first podcast that I ever launched. And when I launched it, there were less than 350,000 total shows. So there's your story.
It's a good one. I have a lot to unpack. We got plenty to get into in this episode. I'm over here like, yes. And it's interesting because I heard you say one thing that I loved, which is I think you said the art of theater in the mind.
Yes.
I love that concept. I absolutely love that concept. And I'm just curious, if you think about your time in radio, and then you transition now into your time in podcasting, which you have this incredible seat, which I love, which you have your own podcast, but you get to help, I'm assuming, hundreds of other people launch their shows, see what makes them successful, what makes them thrive, what makes them grow. Besides theater in the mind being one of them, which for me I hear is like effective storytelling and connection, what are like 1 to 2 of the other takeaways that are applicable that you now use inside of podcasting for you and your clients that you learned in the world of radio?
Yeah, so interesting question in that the first thing that comes to my mind to answer you is that we have to build a show for our client that's going to be sustainable. Coming back to what we were talking about pod fade, it's more than just having like an accountability, like the metaphor of a personal trainer versus joining a gym, right? So we're the personal trainer version of podcasting. But we need to build a show that's going to fit the personality of the host, that is not going to, it's not going to be something cookie cutter that they're going to enjoy doing, that they're going to be comfortable doing. I mean, most people aren't even comfortable hearing their own voice, like old school answering machines and things like that. People don't even leave voicemails anymore. But so you've got it, like the one thing I like to remind people of is that your voice is so incredibly powerful, but it's also the one place where your feelings get stuck, your thoughts get stuck, conflict gets stuck. Like, it's using your voice is an incredible, powerful machine, but you've got to be comfortable and confident when you're doing it. So that's one of the first things people often think when they come through Produce Your Podcast and we're building out these strategy sessions. They think we're going to talk about the format of the show and all the things first, and we will get to that, but we are going to really like talk about why is it that you want to do this podcast? Like, what is it that you want to get out of it? And I mean more than just ROI and metrics and things like that. I mean, it's like, what is it about you that's driving you to get behind this microphone? And then we'll integrate some of those elements into the show. Like, we have a show in launch right now called Am I Allowed to Do This? And the very first strategy call I did with, I love the name too. And the very first strategy call that Courtney and I did together, she was walking and talking on her phone. They're usually done on Zoom, but she was walking and talking. And then the second strategy call, we do 3. The second strategy call we did, she was in her office initially, but she was cagey. And I was like, do you want to just go out and like walk and talk like we did the first one? And she was like, yes, thank you. So by the third session, when we were building out the format of the show, I said, we're going to record this professionally. You need the broadcast quality production. We're going to use the remote platforms, do them in person when needed. But when you open your show, I want you to be recording yourself walking and talking. And I want that to be how you intro every episode. And she was so excited because that was an extension of her. And I have a million examples like that, but that's just, it's something that has to align with you, has to be an extension of your personal brand, has to be an extension of you for it to really work. And then I think the second thing is that you really have to develop the being comfortable with a call to action, and understand that a call to action doesn't have to be something that's salesy, but it just needs to sound like something that's a very warm invitation to be, so that, George, if you're listening to my podcast, The Growth Accelerator, at the end of it, that I am literally inviting you in a way that you want to continue to either work with me, learn more about me, or listen to another episode, other than just sign up for my newsletter. Just treat it like you would if you were meeting someone at a networking event or on the ball field or at church or a networking event. You don't just walk up to somebody, sign up for my newsletter. So those are my 2, really, if you can dial on 2 hills, I will do that.
I love that answer. And I also love listening to you talk, because my intuition and brain is firing like, oh my God, Traci, I have so many things I want to ask you. I have so many ways we're going to do this. And I have something I just thought of in this moment, which we're going to do in a minute. And so I want to summarize that though, because that was gold. And I think for anybody listening, I want to invite you, if you create content anywhere, in any capacity, for your business or for anything, to go re-listen to that. Because what I heard is, number one, the foundational piece is that you have to create an environment that matches your strengths and make you feel the most comfortable, right? And I know this because I have friends that have recorded podcasts in cars. I have friends that record them in a park sitting outside. I've seen people doing, friggin' Jerry Seinfeld does it, cars and coffee, and they drive in cars, right?
I love that. Yeah.
The most important thing that you said is that you have to create an environment or a structure that's conducive to you feeling and being your best, and figure out how to build around that, which I think is astronomically underutilized and underdone. Like, I know for me, I know people that can podcast in coffee shops. I know people that can sit, and I, for whatever reason, need a certain setup and I feel my best in it and I love it. And I used to wear a headset mic because I'm so animated and I'm still figuring out which one I like 700 episodes in. And truthfully, by the
I
way,
know I've
this
been
might
known
shock
to
you.
hit a mic multiple times.
I hit this thing all the time. And for everybody listening and for Traci, who is an audio snob, I am so sorry. I try so hard not to hit it. And I'm not even Italian. That's the craziest part. I just get so excited sometimes that you'd think I was. And I think that that's one of the most important points that you made. And then the other thing is, when we think about this theater, theater in the mind,
Theater of
theater
the
in the
mind.
mind,
Yes.
your ability to feel comfortable is what allows you to create that, to be able to tell
Yes.
stories and to feel authentic and to do it. And then it keeps it loose. Cause like you said, you're never going to walk up somebody in a coffee shop like, sign up for my newsletter. Right. And so it allows you this environment that feels homely, that feels connected, that feels safe, that allows you to kind of thrive in that environment. So I love that answer. Now I'm curious because I have a couple of questions that I'm excited to get into. But the first one is, for people listening to this, I'm gonna unpack this a little bit. I think podcast is a great frame for everybody to hear, but I also think every single thing that you're sharing applies to any content creation whatsoever, any
It
audio,
absolutely does. I
any
think
video.
that's an incredible point. And also writing. So there's been a lot of conversations, right? Or there are a lot of conversations happening in the industry right now about podcasting to books and taking your podcast and creating a book. And then there's a lot of different perspectives around if you just take your transcripts and repurpose them and really, I'm not an advocate for that. I'm an advocate for actually like using that as base content, but then actually maybe working with a ghostwriter or turning some of that more into storytelling type of content. But one example in real time is that we have a client who is a defense a defense consultant, like not
Mm,
something that you would normally really align with storytelling, maybe in a way that would be something that would be theater of the mind, maybe so much, maybe more of a kind of a buttoned up sort of like tight structured type of content. But he is a beautiful writer, a beautiful writer. And he started a Substack before he started his podcast. And he came to work with us and he really wanted to use his podcast as a funnel to drive to his Substack to increase his Substack subscribers. So this is another misnomer. I'm going to bust a myth at the same time I tell you the story. People think you have to do the same format. They think you have to do a question and answer like we're doing, or a solo episode like you and I both do our own solo episodes. And those are very strategic and strong and probably the two most popular formats, but you don't have to be boxed into always doing guest episodes or always doing solo episodes. So when we were working with Ike Wilson, his podcast is The Civic Brief. I wanted him to interview because he has amazing people that he can interview in the defense space. He has a lot of political conversations and opportunities to have those. He's a consultant, so he can share his own expertise that people can identify with. But the one thing that blew my mind and is my most favorite thing about his podcast strategy is he writes these beautiful blogs called Walk With Me's. And so, for example, he would write a beautiful blog about taking a walk with George Washington or taking a walk with Eisenhower. And when I found out that he was doing that, I was like, we have to create these as audio only episodes. We have to create sound design, and people need to go on a walk with Ike with their earbuds and listen. I have chills literally telling you the story. We have to create these walk with me episodes so that people can experience his beautiful writing, his voice narrating them, and then we bring in that theater of the mind and the sound design so that you can get outside and go take a walk with Ike and feel like you're taking a walk with Ike and George Washington. Like, what gets better than that? And it is so cost effective. So cost effective because people get so hung up on, do I have to do video? And that is a beautifully, beautifully articulated and produced episode that just ties back into what he loves, which is writing.
I love that. Okay, so now we're going to do this. because I heard you talk about a myth. And
Yes.
I love that you called out a myth. I want to call out a couple other myths as a podcast host and a coach and somebody who helps people do this and do
I
this.
love a myth buster conversation.
I want your thoughts on the myth. Okay. So I'm just going to throw you. I think I can probably think of like 3 or 4 that are right on the top of my head that I want to throw you. And I just want to know what your thoughts are, what you think about it, and everything. So the first one is we're going straight for the vanity metrics. The first myth is that the amount of downloads that you have equals your success.
That is absolutely false. I wish I had a sound effect. False.
And why is that false for you?
Well, I think we can refer back to story A of migraine sufferer. But it's if you're a business owner and you're thinking about your podcast, like you really want to make sure that your podcast is reaching your audience that is going to ultimately want to do business with you. And especially if you are a consultant, if you're a service professional, if you're a lawyer, if you're in the finance space, you don't need a lot of conversions. You want the right client. You don't want hundreds of the wrong client. So your podcast should be designed to build a platform where people can get to know you and recognize you and hear how you communicate, and maybe even bringing in clients to problem solve so that they can relate to you and be like, oh, I mean, I think I could work with that person. That they get me. They would get me. And if you are, especially if you're more of a high ticket conversion, quality over quantity is going to win every time. We have a podcast in our portfolio called Coached, and she is a very essentially luxury. She's worked with a lot of luxury brands, but her coaching program is very elite focused. She says, I can make money off 100 downloads on my podcast. She gets more than that, but if it's 100 really good people, and also back to the theater of the mind, how many times do you get to show up and be in front of 100 people, 1,500 people, 5,000 people? Those are not small numbers if you were actually in actual venues. And that's why I love to do when we do podcast strategy sessions. I love to tell people, I think you mentioned this earlier in the episode, it can be a solo isolating experience. Like picture yourself getting ready to step out on that stage. Who has butts in those seats?
Yep. Yeah. So, I actually love that. That's myth number 1. I echo the same sentiment. And this is from the guy who's never looked at his analytics.
Good for you. Yeah, because comparison is the thief of joy, and you could think that you're doing something wrong when you're not doing. You're doing something really right. You've got great content, great guests. You've got great conversions. Like I know that without even auditing your show.
Thank you. So here's my second one, and this one I love your thoughts on. I love this one so much. I recorded an entire episode on this, saying Kevin Costner lied to you. If you build it, they won't come. And so I dedicated an entire episode to it in the lens of customer journey and business and marketing, but it's so applicable in podcasting as well. And I hear it, well, I'm just going to launch it and they'll show up. I'm just going to record it and post it and they'll show up. And so curious on your myth of if they build it, they will come.
Well, I'm going to answer that with another myth buster back, which is your friends and family aren't going to listen to your podcast. I don't think my husband's ever listened to one of my episodes. And when I very first launched Journey to There, I was so disappointed when I realized that my friends weren't listening to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same in entrepreneurship, kind of like piggybacking an entrepreneurship lesson there too, is you can't get bogged down in what your friends and family think about what your entrepreneurial vision is or the business idea that you have or the way that you choose to live your life as an entrepreneur, because most people are not going to get you. So that's just a little side note. But in terms of if you build it, they will come eventually. Do you have the staying power to get there? That is the real question. And if you want to build it so that they come, you have got to have the right foundational pillars in place. And that has nothing to do with whether or not you have a $500 microphone or a $50 microphone. that has to do with some really significant podcast SEO strategies, that has to do with how your show description, that has to do with some of the stuff that's not as sexy. But having those foundational pillars really well established from the onset will increase your opportunities. If you build it, they will come. But it is like anything else. When you very first started your first Twitter account, your first Facebook account, built your first website, like, people weren't just showing up in droves. I don't know why people seem to think of, from a marketing perspective, why people seem to think of podcasting differently for some reason. But podcasting is a marketing vehicle, especially for business owners who are leveraging it to grow their businesses. You have to treat your podcast the exact same way you treat building a new brand, launching a new product service. All of the things that you're doing when you're creating paid ads, when you are writing blogs, when you're designing a website, your podcast deserves the same amount of respect, attention, and resources. And if you build it that way, they will come eventually.
Yeah. Okay. So you alluded to this one. I agree with you wholeheartedly. You alluded to this one. I hear this all the time, and I see this, and I unpack this one different ways for different reasons. But another one I hear is like, my audio or video quality doesn't matter.
That's false. That is like false. But for reasons that you may or may not have talked about before. One of the obvious reasons, if it hurts to listen to it or it's difficult to watch it, people will not. They just won't, because there's a lot of other opportunities for how people spend their time. It's not about there are too many podcasts. There's not about the market saturated. It's not about that. It's about choices of how people invest the one non-renewable resource they have, which is time. And if they are not enjoying the experience, they are not going to have the experience again. So you get one shot. And if your audio sucks and your video sucks, especially if you're a business owner and it's an extension of your business, they need to, what they hear, what they see when they go to your website, it needs to be as beautiful when they see you on social. One of the episodes that you did around the beardpreneur, he was talking about, it used to be 7 touches and then it was like 70, and I think now it's like 7,000. It's like, think about that with your podcast too, because if your first touch point with somebody is crappy audio or crappy video, they may not even engage in you in the other ways. But the one thing a lot of people don't think about that I want to really drive home right now is monetization. Because if I've been asked one time, I've been asked 100,000 times, how am I going to make money off my podcast? Well, you're not going to do it if your audio and your video quality suck. I can tell you that much. And brands pay attention. And if you're bringing a brand into your show, they want to be aligned with quality. So do the fun walk and talk lifestyle, capture the personality segment, but then roll into a produced podcast that people, or if you are outside in a park because you literally needed a mental health break, but you wanted to stay consistent with your show, tell your audience that at the very beginning of the episode. Hello, this one's not going to be my usual good quality. I'm in Cabo and my internet is not great today, but I have something I really need to share with you. Are you going to listen to that? Yeah, you're going to listen to that because you're going to want to know what they want to share.
Yeah, well, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think we even hit this earlier on in the show, is that your podcast is yours, which means it requires all of your authentic self. And that's what people get connected to. And you just hit one of my big customer journey principles when teaching people, is that if you pre-handle things and you allow yourself to show up, then people will resonate and connect with that, like letting them know it's outside. And I think we live in a time now where when you and I started podcast, I started going on podcasts in 2012. So the barrier of entry to have like a good microphone was $1,000. And now I can get mics that sound like my $1,000 microphones for $70. And with the tools and the way to audio them. And so I said that I'm wishy-washy on that answer, because I also don't ever want the fear of production or the overwhelm of it to inhibit somebody's progress. But I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you said. And then the last myth I have, and this one I'm ready for.
It's only one more? Let's do more. No, I'm just kidding.
I could do more. I can come up with these all day. I can come up with myths all day. The last one I have is I shouldn't launch my show or I shouldn't go on a show because no one's going to listen to me or I don't have anything to share?
Oh, well, this one's just like a heart tugger.
Mhm.
Because so much of that has nothing to do with whether or not you should launch a podcast. So much of that has to do with how you're feeling about yourself in your head, your heart, and your gut. Because everybody has a voice and everybody has something to say. And the way you're going to say it or the way you're going to share it is going to come across completely differently. Like you and I both have worked and with entrepreneurs, specifically women entrepreneurs, and help them scale businesses to, 5 figures, 6 figures, 7 figures, and beyond. We've both done that, right?
Mhm.
But the stories that you have to tell and how you've gotten them there, and the stories of what I have to say and how I've gotten them there are going to be in different places, different pathways, different methodologies, even if they're the similar, because we are so like-minded, it's almost scary, but
Mhm.
we're still going to share our experiences difference because there are stories. So it is completely false that you shouldn't start a podcast because you think you don't have something to say, or God forbid, you think you're going to run out of content. I used to hear that years ago. I don't hear that now, but I used to
Mhm.
hear, I'm afraid I'm not going to have enough content. Now people are really kind of more content generating machines and they get that. But, 10 years ago, not so much. But I guess at the heart of literally is like you have to examine why is your brain even telling you that? Because that is self-sabotage, that is fear, that is like giving yourself a justifiable excuse of not to take the next step forward. And that is such a bigger picture challenge that pains me that I just would want to give you a hug and also tell you it's not true.
Yeah. Yeah. I love your answer to that. It's actually really interesting. I had an incredible gentleman on my podcast today. He wrote a book called Goat Wisdom because him and his partner lived with goats and they pulled all these business lessons
Love
from
that.
living with goats. And they built a massive multi-$100 million company from a lot of these lessons. And he wrote a book called Goat Wisdom. It's by Brent Ridge. And one of the goat wisdoms that I love is that eat everything. If you don't like how it tastes, you can spit it out. And goats experience the world with their mouth because they don't have hands. So they think everybody says goats eat everything, but what they do is they taste everything and then they spit it out if they don't like it and they only keep eating what they actually like. And I think to your point, all too often we get stuck in moving the starting line over and
Yes.
over and over again on what we think might be, what we think it might feel like. I remember the first time I ever gave a keynote. I never wanted to be a public speaker. I never wanted to be any of that. And I was having an aneurysm, like straight up panic attack, drenched in sweat. It looked like I got out of a sauna. And then I had put this thing off for years. I was like, no, no. And finally, someone bullied me into it. And then I was like, what have I been doing? I love this. I can totally do this. And the same thing with a podcast. And so I think to your point, and I love the way that you answered that question, is that all of us owe ourselves to start the race to at least try it and see, because there is no other voice, there is no other us, and there sure as crap isn't another perspective like ours that has our life experience to deliver that same point, which will resonate with certain people. And so I absolutely love that answer. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. So now I'm gonna go from myths to mistakes because that
Okay.
feels good to me right now.
Sure.
Because you
Absolutely.
have
I
so
mean,
much.
I will
You have
tell you though, I'd never think of it as a right or a wrong. I think of it as a right or a left, but we can talk about which way to go.
I love that. I absolutely love that. But I'm curious too, because you do help so many people with podcasts and with shows, and you've coached and scaled businesses. I'm just curious of like what are the some of the big mistakes that you see people bum into? Is it like launching a show but not having a why, or not having good production like we've talked about, or just recording a show and posting it once and not repurposing it? Like what are some of the commonalities that you see people bumping into that are creating resistance for them?
Right. So I think I'm going to start with, so we do a lot of podcast audits. A lot of times when people are coming through, they've already launched a show. They're maybe feeling stagnant. It's not growing the way they think it should grow, or they just feel like something's not quite right. And so some of the things that we find, these are some tactical things, but for the audience, I really want them to take away some of these tactical things because we're really pulling back the curtain. And I think it could be really helpful for you if you're in
Mhm.
this place. And then I can go into some of the other, more bigger picture stuff. But the tactical pieces, one of the things that we're finding a lot right now specifically is that people are doing what I call setting and forgetting it when they launch a show. So they may have launched a show a year ago, 2 years ago, or during the pandemic, 5 years ago. And so whatever they were doing at the time was top of the line at the time. That's a phrase I use. Like, you might have been top of the line at the time, but the industry has changed dramatically. So you need to go back and you need to revisit a couple of things. Did you choose the right hosting platform that's scalable for you? Just because it's free does not necessarily mean that it's the one that's going to be the best fit for you. You get what you pay for. So there are a lot of amazing choices of hosting platforms out there now that like we've never had before. Things that you want to look for in that hosting platform is what kind of analytics do you get? How much efficiency is there? Do they connect to all the platforms and distribute it, or do you have to manually do that? So really just going back and looking at when you originally set up your show, what are the categories that your show is set up in now? That's another thing that we find as a creator, as a host. You often think this is the direction my show is going to go in. I am sure that it's going to be about this. You get 10, 20 episodes in, maybe even 100 episodes in, and you realize that you may be talking to a different audience than you originally set out to. There's a podcast we produce called The Uplifters. And when she very first launched her show, Aranta Savas, the host, she wanted to tell big, bold, beautiful, courageous stories about things that women were doing to uplift the world. It's such a cool show. But she's 150 plus episodes in now. And what she's really discovered about her target audience is that they're women over 40. And those stories that resonated the most are these second chapter stories, the ones that, that it's not too late or things like that. So if she kept her show description the exact same as she had launched it with a couple years ago, it's not going to be relevant to what the audience will find now if a new person comes in and discovers the show. So you've got to really stay on top of, as your show and your content evolves, so does your show description. And I guess the third thing of the tactical things is that we are in a massive wild, wild west of organic discovery. SEO is not the same as it was yesterday. Whenever this episode releases, it changed yesterday. I don't even care what day it is. And so an AI has come on like a freight train. There are some very podcast specific strategies for SEO. As a company, we invest in 3 separate tech stacks just to stay on top of the SEO optimization for our clients for this reason. Because podcasting, if you do not do it for any other reason, is an amazing way to show up in AI overviews, in ChatGPT Q&As, and it's even been integrated into Spotify now. So that doesn't just happen by accident, though. You really need to understand how that piece works.
That's a whole other podcast right there. That
is.
That's a masterclass that you guys should produce, because I know a lot of people that are in that bucket, myself included, because things are changing so quick. But it's so crazy though, because I had a moment, and I didn't do this intentionally, but I got a cold DM on Instagram from somebody who didn't follow me, and he's like, "Hey, I'd love to schedule a call." And on one call became my client. I'm like, "How did you find me?" He's like, "This is the craziest story. I told ChatGPT what I was looking for, what I valued in coaching, and what I kind of wanted to accomplish. And I asked it to list me the business coaches that could help me. And you were on a list with 4 other people. And then I asked it, based on what you know about me and what I stand for, which one should I use?" And he said, "But the only one you should use is George Bryant." And it sent him a copy of my podcast. And I didn't do that intentionally, but it blew my mind, because that's just such a different way than what we were used to, like the old school 2010 SEO. And there's so much context in there now. It was really incredible.
Yes. And I think what that comes down to is whether you invest in a company like mine, or you invest in a freelance person, or you just make an investment. Like, this is another one of those mistakes that I loved. And it's a fine line for me, because this isn't a sales pitch, because it's not about investing. I mean, I'd love it if you invested in Produce Your Podcast. We're really great at what we do. But my point is that when you are launching a podcast, especially if you want to generate visibility, leads, sales, if you're using it as a growth vehicle for your business, make an investment on the front end to get those foundational pieces set up correctly. Even if you pull it in-house and produce it in-house, even if you have a team do it yourself on the long term, for that initial launch, make sure that you are working with somebody who has done it before, who understands it, who's staying on top of these trends, that gets those foundational pillars for you activated correctly. Because that's something, again, if you were launching a new product, you would make sure that your packaging was right. You would make sure that the e-commerce part of your website worked correctly so that someone could actually buy the product once it launched. You would make sure that the social media was set up so that people could, get awareness around the new project. You would do all of those things for a new product. Do the same thing for your podcast.
Yeah. And I love it. And I think your 3 foundational pillars are discovery, audience growth, and conversions, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to give some tangibility to everybody listening on like what Traci's talking about, right? That discovery process is like, if you build a home and you're a realtor and you don't take photos, you don't tell anybody, you don't list it, you don't know where to get it, nobody knows that beautiful home that you built is good.
Or even taking it one granular level down. If you're not listed properly in the MLS, the other realtors aren't going to find it to show it. So 100%. You might have the listing, but if that is a great metaphor. I might steal that one because that is so true. It's so true.
It's all yours, because when I think about it, I'm like, the discovery phase is that. And I was like, but then the audience growth is the open house and the foot traffic, right? You need people to come through the house, to see it, to experience, to feel it, which is what your podcast is. It's a place where so many people can get context. I have a private client and she does all of her selling on Instagram. And I was like, no, we need to launch a podcast. And the podcast is nothing more than for people to experience what it's like to work with you, because there's so much more context, how you respond to questions, how you talk about clients. There's so much more depth besides like a 3-minute reel or a 2-minute Instagram story. And sure as crap, we launched the podcast and a couple $100,000 of revenue came in, and we started asking people on the forum, like, where'd you find us? Oh, you talked about this on this one episode and I had to reach out. That's how I knew you were the coach for me, right? And so not all the goals are always just, the myths that we talked about earlier. And so that audience growth is like getting people this experience of you so that they can know, like, and trust you, they can feel safe with you. And then the third one is like, you need people to write an offer on a house, right? But that house might be, join my community. I'd love to have a cup of coffee with you. I'd love to feature you on my podcast. I'd love it if we could connect somewhere, which is where I bring this question, because I want to know, because you called this out earlier and I thought it was so funny when you're like, don't just say join my newsletter. And so this is something you preach. This is really something in your world of like, there's a very big difference between a cold call to action and a warm invite. And I would love your thoughts on that for everybody listening.
Yeah, so we actually have the strategy that we implement for our clients is 2-part. So an evergreen call to action is something that you can do. You decide what it is. So if you want someone to connect with you on LinkedIn, or if you want someone to visit your website, or if you want someone to do something that's never going to change, that's not, maybe it's more evergreen, not time sensitive. What we always recommend is, even if you open your own show, have a professionally recorded voiceover to close the show, and put that one single evergreen call to action in that, because it's a nice buttoned up professional way to just wrap the show and have that in there. The bonus tip on that is use the URL of the name of your show, because if you're an attorney and you're Smith, Parkinson, and Lakowski.com, but no one knows how to spell that.
I feel so called out in my first business, but I'll tell you that later.
And they're never going to go there if they're multitasking while they're listening to the show. And we have a literal example of that, of a podcast in launch right now, is Beyond the Bell, and they are a law firm whose names are difficult to spell. So Beyond the Bell, they are going to be using the URL beyondthebellpod.com, because you found the podcast as Beyond the Bell. You listen to the podcast as Beyond the Bell. When you go to want to continue the conversation, you're going to think Beyond the Bell. You're not going to think of, how do I spell this amazing host's last name? So that's the bonus tip in that. So, and also secure the name of your podcast URL because it works differently than GoDaddy. We're getting kind of a little bit of a rabbit hole of tactics here, but these are really good gems for people. So it doesn't work like GoDaddy, right? So two people could have the podcast Beyond the Bell, actually. And so what you want to be sure of is that you have all of those discovery things in place so that when people are searching for a podcast about legal or finance or startups or CPOs or pre what I've lost my train of thought of what they do. They when you take your company public, that's what I was thinking.
Oh yeah,
so
yeah,
when IPO, not CPOs. When someone's searching for a podcast about pre-IPO or post-IPO, like they're going to find your show, right? So, but you need to own the URL of your show because that's how you kind of claim your first in the space, and that's how you claim. So don't be discouraged if you decide this great name and then you go and you see, oh, someone else already has that name. Look at when was the last time they released? Did they release consistently? Some people just started a podcast 5 years ago with that name. They never released another episode. That's not going to be a problem. You're going to be able to work around that. But the whole idea of this call to action, so evergreen call to action in a recorded close is ideal because what it leaves you the opportunity as a host is to do our trademark phrase for it is a warm invite call to action. So as you're wrapping up your episode, as you are having this opportunity to close things out with your audience, they may not listen all the way through the recorded close, but they're going to listen to you wrapping it. That's when you have the opportunity to be like, it would be so great, or it would mean so much to me, or I would love it if. These really connectivity phrases. And picture yourself when you're doing this. The key is picture yourself having a one-on-one conversation with somebody. As you're wrapping up, be like, I would really love it, George, although you're not going to say George because you're talking to him about things, but it's like using that. It's like, I would really love it if you've enjoyed this conversation and want to learn more about what we do, visit Produce Your Podcast because we have a lot of valuable resources and there's a lot of content that goes even deeper than what we've talked about today. So what I did there is I made it personal. I said, I want you, like the person listening with their earbuds in their ear or watching. And then I told them one place to go, one place, not a food court where there's multiple things like LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram. Like, no, thank you. The confused mind says no. Invite them with a personal phrase. Number 2, tell them one place to go. And number 3, tell them what's in it for them. So if you go to produceyourpodcast.com, you're going to find this wealth of resources through blogs and samples of the shows that we talked about today. And you can sample some of the different strategies. Like that's value. That's a value to them. That's why they should do that. Not just because it's all about me, but if you want to get in touch with me, you can do that too. But see the difference?
Yep. Yeah. I love it. And it's so perfect. It's almost like I set this up intentionally because Traci, what I would love is I would love for you to do a warm invite for everybody listening and tell them about all the amazing things that you have to offer and where they can find out more and where they should absolutely connect with you.
Oh my gosh. Well, at the risk of sounding redundant, but I really would love, it's like if these tips and the things that we've talked about and these Mythbusters and all of these things have been of interest to you, I think you would have a lot of fun going to Produce Your Podcast and going to our work page. And there's so many of the shows that I mentioned, they're either coming soon or they're already there where you can actually see some of these strategies in real life, like not just my theories or my opinions, but actually shows that we built that actually show them. And there are some incredible blogs and things that can give you this more of these structural and tactical tips that really can make a difference for you.
Yeah. And
at produceyourpodcast.com.
I wanted it to be redundant because I wanted people to hear it. And I wanted you to give us the example from the queen herself doing it. And I absolutely love this episode. I could literally talk to you for days. I could do this with you all day. I'm stoked I get to come on your show. And
Yes, I was going to say, well, we get to have a repeat, an encore. It won't be a do-over or a repeat because it'll be fun, different, and we'll explore even more. But yes, on the Growth Accelerator podcast. And here, I would love it if you're listening to this podcast and you want to hear another conversation with George and Traci to check out the Growth Accelerator podcast.
Yeah, and we're gonna do the role switch. She's gonna interview me, and I'm really, really stoked. And so, Traci, it feels right. I always ask this question to people I'm excited to hear the answer from. But you're somebody who's continued to take leaps of faith and invested in yourself and believed in a why bigger than the resistance in front of you, and you've pushed through and you've made it happen, and you constantly innovate and you keep going. You have this glow and this radiance and this excitement about you. It's like this unlimited fuel source. And so I'm curious, and I always say this to my guests, like, imagine everybody listening to this episode forgot absolutely everything that we talked about up until this point, but you have the ability right now to tattoo a piece of wisdom on their soul that they will take with them forever. What would your tattoo wisdom be?
It would be start where you are. Just take one step. I guarantee you, I know we hit a lot of, you could do this or you could do that, or don't do this, or this doesn't work, or this works better. But there's probably one thing that you heard today that either hit you in your head, your heart, or your gut, or all three. And just start with that one thing, because it's consistency compounds over time. But it doesn't even happen if you don't start. So just do one thing.
I love it. I love it. Well, Traci, thank you for coming on the show with me. Thank you for being here. Thank you for gifting us with your time. I appreciate it. And I just thank you for the connection and all of the conversation today.
Well, thank you. And I am looking forward, and I have enjoyed meeting you. And I'm really looking forward into continuing the conversation with you, not only just on my podcast, but in the future.
Well, amazing. Well, now I need you to stick around and listen to my warm intro and summary of the show. And so for everybody listening, I say this all the time, and the biggest mistake that we could make is allowing this to be shelf help, because as Traci said, something probably hit you in the head, the heart, or the gut. And that's the invitation. I call it God knocking at the door, asking us to take action on it. And so, as she said, start where you are. Maybe that's documenting their story. Maybe it's going and checking out a resource on her site. Maybe it's looking at your podcast and seeing where you can have a better foundation. Maybe it's adding warm calls to action to your podcast or your content or your business and realizing that things feel cold and transactional. But whatever it is, it's worth trying and starting today, because as the wise goats say, you're better to taste it and spit it out if you don't like it than never taste it and not know what it might lead to. And so I would say that everybody listening to this has a story. You have a perspective, you have a life, you have wisdom, you have experience. And however you're telling that story, whether it's written, whether it's a podcast, whether it's content, whether it's social, everything that was shared in this episode is beneficial and supportive and only has a net positive if you actually apply it. And as much as I wish Traci and I could fly through this screen or fly through your earbuds and do it for you, we can't, but we will both walk alongside of you and help you do it. And so if I can help you in any way, reach out to me on Instagram, shoot me a DM, we'll get a cup of virtual coffee. If Traci can help you in any way, reach out to her, go to her website that she mentioned, check out all the incredible resources. But most importantly, remember that relationships will always beat algorithms, especially the one with yourself. So have a beautiful day. You will either see me in your earballs, you will either hear me in your earballs or see me in your eyeballs. But either way, we love you and God bless.